Hey everyone, welcome back to my stream. Today we'll be continuing with the React Learning React series, and you know the drill. Uh we're gonna just get started. I think it's been I've been doing these intros for so long it would be like embedded within your head by now. Okay, let's get started. So yesterday, as always, we learned quite a lot, and we learned I believe it was hooks. We learned how to use state, and which which I believe is one of the most, if not the most important concept in React. So as always, excited to see what's in it for today. So yeah, let's begin. Now before we start with the video, let's just do a quick recap of sorts. So yesterday we built out was it the login form? Yeah, it was a login form. So yeah, this we built out the login form to demonstrate the initial way to kind of display values. So here, as you can see, we have certain events as such, right? So when the form is submitted, we want to prevent the default. The default is that the page kind of reloads, so we don't want to do that. And what else? When we type something in the username field, we wanna what should happen when we type something on the username field? That's what the on change event is about, right? Not only typing. I remember typing has a thing of its own, an event of its own. I believe it's called on key down. On change can be anything. We can even paste values in the input field. Same goes for password. But basically, React has this where we can tell how elements should ironically react based on different events. When different events are triggered, how should the HTML element react? And then what we covered next was arguably, well, I haven't completed the course, but I believe this is the, if not the most important concept in React, which is states, right? Um, Not states. I believe it's called hooks or something, but whatever. Basically, we use this method use state from React, but then for each and every field, we use this to get the value and a method to set the value, right? And then we just update the value using the set, using whatever method was returned by useState, and that updated value is referenced with whatever this variable would be. That's the way that I understand it for now. And yeah, what that means is that, so for the username field, if we want to update the username, we just update the username key, and then that is reflected in the form fields object. Like this gets updated afterwards. Same goes for password, and same goes for display name. And based on these values, we can have certain logic. For example, we can say that only mm, disable the button if all the fields are not entered or something like that, right? We can have our own logic of sorts. Great. Yeah, that's it really. So now let's go ahead and continue with the video.
But I'm going to show you how we can actually define state for an array, because a lot of times you're going to want to render lists of elements, such as an array of users, and then you may need to make updates to a specific element in that array and have it reflect on the application itself, on the user's view. So this is a very important concept, so you definitely want to make sure you pay attention to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some state. So I'm going to have an array of users. I'm going to call my state variable users, and then the dispatch function will be called set users. And then I'm going to go ahead and call the useState hook, and I'll pass in an array. And I'm going to just keep this simple. So I will pass in two objects. Both will be representing users. And one thing that I do want to also mention as well is that I have this user details component. I created this very early.
I think we already covered a bit of that, and we created the mock users, and we are kind of defining the layout for set user and users. We also did dynamic rendering here. We are dynamically rendering each user. Let's start the server and see what the output looks like right now. So we do npm run dev, and there we go. Let's open that up, and this is what we get. Now let's go back and get a few here, and
such as is an example.
okay,
So
there
what we
we
want
go.
to do is we want to give the user, in this case ourselves, the ability to edit each individual user to whatever it is that they want to edit to. Okay, in order for us to do this, we obviously need some kind of text box for us to type stuff, so we need an input field. So this is going to combine all the things that we've learned so far, such as conditional rendering, handling forms, handling events, things like that. Okay, and again, if you haven't been following along with all the previous sections up until now, don't worry, I'll do my best to explain every single thing that's going on as well. So what I'll do is, the first thing that I want to do is I want to create some states. I basically want to represent whether or not we are currently editing our user or not. So we're going to go ahead and create a variable, a state variable. We're going to call this isEditing. So that's going to be the name of the variable, and then the dispatch function will be called.
Let's go back a few, and let's just. I
Yeah,
think we
we call-
skipped something important there.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my the users and have a user issues because we have the same component. We need to make sure we import user details. So let's go up over here and import that from the components folder, user details file, just like that. Now let's go ahead and make sure we pass in our props. So the first one that we must pass in this case, just like that. And for the user props value, it's just literally going to be the object user itself. Okay, and there shouldn't be any issues because we have the same key value pairs, ID, username, and email address. So now if I go into the document, you can see now I have both of my users being rendered to our page. Now this is wonderful, but what if I wanted to make updates to my user's state variable? So let's say down the road you want to add the option for your administrator to create a new user on the spot. So you may have a form that allows the admin to add a new user, and then it will be updated on this view, so you'll now see 3 users instead of 2. Or perhaps you want to update a specific user's username, such as Anson, or maybe you want to update their email address, such as anson@gmail.com, and then you also want to make sure that those changes are saved and reflected onto the document. Or maybe you may want to also just delete the user entirely. So these are all things that I'm going to cover. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my user details component, and I'm going to go ahead and modify this component just a little bit, just so that way we can suit our example. So what we want to do is we want to give the user, in this case ourselves, the ability to edit each individual user to whatever it is that they want to edit to. Okay, in order for us to do this, we obviously need some kind of text box for us to type stuff, so we need an input field. So this is going to combine all the things that we've learned so far, such as conditional rendering, handling forms, handling events, things like that. Okay, and again, if you haven't been following along with all the previous sections up until now, don't worry, I'll do my best to explain every single thing that's going on as well. So what I'll do is, the first thing that I want to do is I want to create some states. I basically want to represent whether or not we are currently editing our user or not. So we're going to go ahead and create a variable, a state variable. We're going to call this isEditing. So that's going to be the name of the variable, and then the dispatch function will be called setIsEditing, and then useState. So the value of this will be a boolean, or the type of this variable will be a boolean, and the default value will be false, because by default we're not going to be in edit mode. Okay, we're going to just be in regular view mode. So now what I'm going to do is this. For each user, I also want to make sure I display an edit button that will allow me to change the state of the isEditing variable. So this will allow me to actually click on the button and then display all of the input fields in order for us to make updates to our users. So the way that I'm going to do this is, let's see, I think what I'll do is, I think on the top of every user, I'll just have an edit button. So I'm going to go and just copy this div and create another div that I will just paste the whole thing inside. And then up top over here, or actually maybe on the bottom, I will do another div, and I'll add a couple of buttons. So the first one I'll do is edit. So it'll look like this. Okay. If you want to get fancy, you can also style this as well. You can use like a flex box, but again, I'm not going to make this overly complicated. You know, let me actually move this up to the top, just so that way this one pertains to this one. Okay. I will also add another button as well. I'll add the delete button, because later on I will show you how we can delete the user as well. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do is, whenever we click on this edit button, we want to be able to toggle the state of isEditing. Okay. Because when we click on the edit button, we want to change our view from just regular view to actual edit mode. So we need to register an on-click event listener onto this edit button, and we just want to make sure we pass in our callback function. We want editing is to the access to the actual value of it. Very quickly, I'll console log is editing, just so you can see that it is in fact toggling. So you can see now it goes from true, false, true, false, true, false, just like that. Perfect. Okay. So what we want to do, conditional rendering. So that shouldn't be any surprise. So the only two things I want to be able to edit, or give the user the opportunity to edit, is their username and their email address. We don't want to allow them to edit their ID. So what I'll do is, for the username field right over here, I'm going to go ahead and edit this right over here, display an like. So if I refresh the page, it's straightforward. We also want to just allow the user to, okay, but that we have the correct attributes set. So first, for the username field, let me set the name to username, and then let me give this an ID of user.
I think I get the gist of it. how about we try to do this on our own first, and then we can review if it's right or not. Or if we need help, we can go and look into the video and do it that way, you know. So let's begin. Similar to what he's doing, I'll create variable is editing. Let's import use state from React. And what would we name this? It would be set edit maybe. And I guess what we'll do afterwards is that he had a button for each and every element, right? So one for username, one for email, or was it one button for? So just look that up.
User, I'll just have an edit button, sir, or actually maybe on the bottom I will do another div.
And what I think,
inside, and then up top over here.
yeah, I believe let's just follow with this recap for now, and then I'm sure there might be other exercises we can play around with. So let's do that.
And I created this very early on. It's very simple. Okay, details. So we're going to make sure that each one of our users have an ID, a username, and an email address. And then let me change the username as well as the email address. And as JavaScript, also add to a save and reflect, just so that way we need to edit box for us to type term. Okay, where I display an edit button. That's another div that I will just paste the whole thing inside.
My main question is that I'll share the thoughts that I'm having. So we have is editing and set is editing, and how is he laying out the buttons? Okay, one button for each user. When we click that button, we're gonna change. We're gonna change it, set it to. But are we gonna change it for just? We need like are we gonna change it to like are we gonna enable the user to edit all the users or just user one?
Move this up to the top. I want to be able to edit mode. We want to set true. I want to set it. We want to set it takes in where we instead of actually passing in a literal value, you can pass in a callback example. When we covered the register form example, where we instead of actually passing in a literal value, you can pass in a callback function, because that callback function receiving the actual value of is editing and then just negating it, so that way it is being toggled on and off. Okay. So now I go from true, false, true, false, true, false, just like that, and give the user. If we just to, it's going to take us. So let's go edit mode and do how this will look like. Input field. Otherwise, we will display just their username. Now I will make some changes to this input field in just a second. I just want to show you how this will look like. That should be pretty straightforward. We want to just allow the user to email address as well. So let's do that. Is editing, input, or email. Okay. If I click edit, now you can see that we have our username field and our email field.
Okay, but then wouldn't that affect both this and this? I know he hasn't written the logic out for user 2.
If I click this edit button down over here, it will reflect on this user.
Oh, never mind. How did he do that?
So if I'm going to go ahead and edit this for their name and their email rendering, so that shouldn't be any surprise. So the only two things I want to be able to edit or give the, I'm going to go ahead and edit this right over here. So I'm going to use a ternary operator. So is editing. So if we are in edit mode, then we will display an input field. Otherwise, we will display just their username. Now I will make some changes to this input field in just a second. I just want to show you how.
Oh, okay. So this is for each individual user, right? So yeah. I had kind of a blink there, I guess. Okay, anyway, let's go back and okay, so let's say we are in edit mode right now, and then the rest of it should be pretty straightforward, right? We just change the username and user.email. Let's give it a shot. Let's see what we get. So let's see. So we're gonna have a button down here, which we label as edit. Let's also have a button called delete, because apparently we'll be doing that. Like we'll have is deleting and set delete or something. I guess we can do set edit state. That makes more sense, doesn't it? Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a on change event on click. It makes sense for the button to have on click, right? But I remember that maybe it's just my mind doing tricks on me. I thought he did on change there. Yeah. Why does this have JSX attributes must only be assigned a non-empty expression? Oh, okay, because I, I haven't written anything there, I guess. In that case, on click, set is editing to not is editing, right? And then let's have logic here. Basically, we check, hey, are you in editing mode? If you are, then I want the input. Oh, I want the input tag. Else, just give me your normal span tag, and we'll copy this over for email. Of course, change this to be email, and then let's go back. We should get. Oh, okay. What now? Console. Unique key prop. Oh yeah, I remember that one. So a key is needed because it's something that React needs, I believe. If my memory serves right, like it, so that it deletes and does changes to the correct element, right? There's no confusion between that, and that needs to be unique. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna happen the user.id as our key here. Let's see. Let's reload. Use state is not defined. Okay. What do you mean? It is defined. Oh, okay. This needs to be lowercase. All right. And if I click edit, nothing happens. Okay, let's just reload. No errors so far. But when I click, okay, no. Ah, interesting. So we have no errors, but it isn't doing what it needs to do. I guess it's not negating its editing. Let's just go back and check. So button on click, I want to change this editing to not this editing. And let's also console.log is editing. What is this even doing? Is on click, what are we doing actually? We need to reassign this, don't we? Yeah, what am I doing? I said that its state needs to be set to not this editing. This should work, right? Okay. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna change this to this, and let's console.log is editing. Edit. But I do get something, but it's not what I want. Okay, let's do that to make sure. Oh, all right. So this editing actually comes out to be this console.log is editing, and now can you just console.log is editing? Okay, cool, that's working. So what happened is that all these events take in the element as such as the argument here. Not I don't know why I gave us editing there, but yeah, that's what happened. Anyway, so now I guess what we'll do is we have this logic set here. So let's see. I guess we're gonna do something similar to the register form there. So we're gonna give this a name, and we're gonna give is this also a name. Let's also give this an ID. Also give this an ID. And let's have I guess this edit text should turn to save, right? But if it's in okay, let's think on the logic here. So I guess what I would want to do is that maybe the edit button can be converted to a save button, and when I click the save button, the values get reassigned. Or another thing is that I can also have two buttons, one for username, one for email, and then But that looks ugly, doesn't it? Let's do it the first way. Let's have are you editing? Then display edit. Else display save. Now, if you're editing, you need to display save. Else display edit to end is editing mode. Edit is not defined. Maybe this needs to be wrapped around and no, this like this. Okay, so that's working now. When I had save, I want the thing to be saved. So I guess for that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna either way I need to set the edit state. But if you are in this editing mode, then I want to get the values inserted for this. So I guess we'll use the form data, right? How was that used? Is it in here? When we need to get the element is what I'm thinking. So when we get to get username and email, get element in React, how would that work? I guess you do have access to the document element, right? So I guess we can do something like let username element equal document dot get element by ID, and we get username. Similarly, email element is this, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna simply set user dot username to be username element dot target, but actually doing will be just value, right? Because we are the target, I believe. So in fact, let's just, let's not set the value, let's just log this. Let's do the same for our email element. And let's just remove this and see if it's working. Let's go back and type some random values here. Okay, we do get the values. Wasn't there a value here? Am I passing an username? I mean, am I passing the go to app.jsx? This needs to be username. And now I guess what we'll do is we'll just we'll just say user dot username is gonna be equal to the username element, and then email sorry, user dot email is gonna be equal to the email element dot value. This needs to be dot value. I think that should work. Yeah, let's check it out. If I wanna change this to Mike and Mike at gmail.com. Hit save. Yeah, there you go. That gets saved. Will I get my origin? Yeah, I will get my original data. So how do I prevent that from happening? I guess like this does get edited, but it doesn't get permanently saved, does it? Like when I reload the page, it gives me the I guess in a real application we would send it to the database and this would fetch it from the database and it would get the updated value. Maybe this is just what we had to do. Like we don't or can you do this without a database? Can you actually send the value here? Hmm. Or maybe that's why we have users and set users defined here. I guess we can just pass in the function here, right? So we can do set user. We can just pass that in there, right? Go here. We restructure the user, yes. But can we also define set user and then we can call set user and then let's use a spread operator. Actually, we don't need to use a spread operator because we have all the elements, right? So username is gonna be equal to user.username. Same goes for your email. That should overwrite it. And then what else? What else should we do? At the beginning, let's so that we don't have an empty array. Actually, you know what? Let's see if this is working first, and then we'll come back. And we hit save. And save set user is not a function. Huh. Console.log. I guess we can pass it inside user itself, can't we? But then we'll have a huh. Okay, let's think here. Let's think here. Okay, set user is like it needs to return a it's set users, not set user, first of all. So we'll need to return set users. And how do we let's see. So we are passing in the user, but where is our like this is our oh wait a second, wait a second. Let's just make this the as props for a second, yeah. Just log props because that's the only thing which this accepts, right? Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I guess what we'll need to do from our side is this is confusing. Okay, so here we have set users. Cool. We're passing that in here, and then we get that function inside the props. Cool. But this accepts the array, right? Like we need, like if we are to use set users, we need to get access to this and this. I mean, it doesn't work for just one user, would it? If I just pass in one user, then it will overwrite the rest, I believe. Hmm. Okay, I guess I'm just gonna continue with the video and see how he's doing it. Maybe I'll get some ideas, so let's do that. But anyway, we were able to do sort of what we wanted, so I'll consider that a win.
Display an input field. Otherwise, we'll display just their username. Now, I will make some changes to this input field in just a second. I just want to show you how this will look like. So if I refresh the page, you can see right now we're currently in view mode. Okay, if I click on the edit button, it's going to take us to edit mode. Okay, so that should be pretty straightforward. We were previously in view mode, now we're in edit mode. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the same thing for email address because we also want to just allow the user to edit their email address as well. So let's do that. Is editing input or email. Okay, if I click edit, now I can see that we have our username field and our email field. If I click this edit button down over here, it will reflect on this user itself. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. Now let's go ahead and go back to our input fields. We want to make sure that we have the correct attributes set. So first, for the username field, let me set name to username, and then let me give this an ID of username as well. And then let me go ahead and also set the value. So we actually want to bind a state variable to this input field, so that way we can actually track the state of whatever the user is typing into this input field. So we do need to create a state variable for the username. So I'm going to do that right up top over here. So const username, and then the dispatch function called set username, and then we call use state. Now, the default value, you might be wondering, well, I'm going to pass in an empty string, right? Well, you could, but actually something better that might be more appropriate is we can actually pass in the user's username and set that to be the default value. And the reason why this would make sense is because, first of all, it would give a better experience.
Yeah.
Think of it like this, right? When you've used the form before, let me zoom out a little bit. When you've used the form before, and let's say you have tried to edit your own username. When you click on the edit button, you'll see this input field, but then you'll also see your current username as well. And not every single application does it this way, but I personally think that it's better from a user experience standpoint. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and pass the username as a value for this value attributes. And then we need to make sure that we are adding an event handler for our input field whenever we are changing the value of the input field. So that's going to be the onChange event handler. And again, I also covered this in the previous section when we talked about the register form. So go ahead and check that part out if you haven't already. So just remember that whenever we change the value of an input field, in other words, if I were to type something or paste something inside the input field, it is going to trigger this onChange event. So it's kind of like it is detecting whenever you're typing something, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is detecting keyboard strokes. I just want it to be specific. So we're going to pass in our event handler function. Remember that this function takes in the argument, the event object itself. And then what I'm going to do is every single time this function is called, we want to update the state of username. And to do that, we just call set username. And then we can pass in e.target.value. Okay. Now, since the default value is just going to be username, which is this state variable right over here, e.target.value. Okay. Now, since the default value is just going to be username, which is this state variable right over here, and the default value of our username state variable is going to be whatever it was.
But we only want it to be saved when we click this editing button, right?
In, as this user
I mean, edit
that
button.
that wouldn't have a
save
set username.
button.
It'll basically just be whatever the user is either deleting or adding onto their current username, unless if they just control X it. In other words, they just cut the entire input box and just paste it in something new. Okay, so if I refresh, you can see now if I click edit, you'll see I have my username, and then you can see that my current username is just right over here, and I can type and I can change whatever I want. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We'll do the same thing for email. So we'll go ahead and I'll just duplicate this line, or I'm sorry, let's do the same exact thing. I'm going to copy all these attributes and just paste them over here. And we're going to set the name to email, set the ID to email. And one thing that you could also do with email fields is you can actually set the type to email, so that way this ensures that the user is actually entering an email. Okay, but I'm just going to leave this alone for now. I'm not going to do that. We're going to bind email, so that way this ensures that the user is actually entering an email. Okay, but I'm just going to leave this alone for now. I'm not going to do that. We're going to bind the email state variable to this input field, and then instead of just calling set username, we're going to call set email. Okay, so now if I click on edit, you'll see that I have both my username and email fields being displayed, and it has the current status of our username and email inside the input box itself. Okay, so now what we want to do is I want to be able to make changes to my username by typing into these fields, and then I also want to make sure that I can click on a button to save these changes, and then when I click on that button, what needs to happen is we need to update that specific user object. Okay, so there's a lot of other things that we have to do, so we're going to take it step by step. The first thing that we want to do is obviously have our save button. So I think what I'll do is, I think up top over here, I'll just add a save button. Again, this is not the most pleasant viewing experience, but again, the whole purpose of this is to show you functionality over styling and looks. Okay, you can worry about styling this up yourself later on, but I just want to really just focus on functionality. So we're going to add the save button right over here, and then when we click on the save button, we want to be able to update the state of our users. Okay, so first off, how do we actually do that? Okay, how do we actually update this specific user as well as updating the user's state itself? Well, we need to actually first know which user we want to update. And remember how earlier I told you that
Be added from user.id.
I will show you how we can grab that. Well, it's actually a lot easier than you might expect. So what I'll do right now is show you what happens whenever I click on this save button. So on click, let me register this on click event, and then we'll just go ahead and console log the user itself. And if I go into the document, you'll see that if I click on this save button, which pertains to this user over here, I log the first user. You can see the ID, username, and email are all over there. If I click on this save button, it logs the second user. Okay, so this should tell you right off the bat that each one of these user details components are its own instances. Okay, so although we might have the same type of user component being rendered, they have their own state, they have their own identity, so they're not the same thing at all. Okay, so knowing this, I can very easily use the ID of the user to determine, okay, which specific user object do I want to edit? Because the way that we're going to update the state is like this. We're going to go through the array, and we're going to find the user that we want to update. And then we're going to update the entire array as a whole. Now, there's actually ways to do this in React without actually modifying the original array. Because remember that React, you want to practice immutability. You want to make sure that you are not actually directly modifying, directly mutating the user's array itself. You want to do things in an immutable way. So while you might know how to necessarily directly mutate an original array's contents, you definitely don't want to do that in React. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. We need to set up our components in a way where I can actually update the user's state, because right now we are kind of in a little bit of a situation. You'll notice that the user's state is actually in a completely different component. Now remember that the
Okay, let's just make sure that our current code is aligned with his. So I'm gonna delete what I built out here. He has made a separate save button, right? Rather than, so let's just make sure we're aligned with his version. So let's do that real quick. So let's see here. Let's just remove this button out, right? Let's have a edit button, and then we also have a save button. This is all good. Okay, now we want to change is editing when we click the button. Did he? Okay, let's just confirm that. Yeah, it's on click. Like when we click the button, we need to change the is editing value. So let's do that. I guess we don't even need to, like, if it's not needed. I think it's optional, isn't it? Like we can just pass an arrow function. We don't need to pass the element there, and it works. And we have our button here, our edit button working here. So let's just confirm that before we move on. Okay, something is broken. Yes, it's us passing set users. Let's remove that. Go back. Yeah, let's not console.log props because we don't have that. And okay, the edit functionality is working in a way. Next, what we're gonna do is we're gonna set the value for the username. So we're gonna set that to be username, and we're gonna register a on change event, which says change. What you're gonna do is you're gonna set the username. Is it? But again, don't we wanna?
The same type of user component being rendered, they have their own state, they have their own identities. Okay, which specific user object do I want to edit? Update the note, the same type of user component being rendered, they have their own state, they have their own identity, so they're not the same thing at all. Okay, so knowing this, I can very easily use the ID of the user to determine, okay, which specific user object do I want to edit? Because the way that we're going to update the state is actually a way for that you are directly or actually in child easy or direct prop. Make sure I add this to the prop types. So set users will be a function. What I'm going to do is since users in a way you to determine, we're going to add the save button styling and looks. Okay, you can again, this is not, so we're going to take it step by step. The first thing that we want to do is obviously have our save button, specific user object, the one, and actually entering an email. Go ahead and I'll just duplicate this line. We'll change this from username to user email, and I'll change the name of this from email, and we'll just do the same exact thing. I'm going to copy all these attributes and just paste them over here. And
my question is, wouldn't we wanna just set the username only when we? I guess he'll write the logic there. He's taking it step by step. I need to watch the whole video before I, or at least the whole segment before I ask questions, I guess. Anyhow. So on change, we're gonna just run this. We're gonna set username to be e.target.value. Same thing applies for let's just copy this over to, actually we need to copy this and that thing, and then let's just paste it. Oops, I don't think I copied it correctly, so let's do that again, and let's change username to email. That should be it. Also, let's define set email and email.
we're going to set the name to email, set the ID to email. And one thing that you could also do with email fields is you can actually set the type to email, so that way this ensures that the user is actually entering an email. Okay, but I'm just going to leave this alone for now. I'm not going to do that. We're going to bind the email state variable to this input field, and then instead of just calling set username, we're going to call set email. Okay, so now if I click on edit, you'll see that I have both my username and email fields being displayed, and it has the current status of our username and email inside the input box itself. Okay, so now what we want to do is I want to be able to make changes to my username by typing into these fields, and then I also want to make sure that I can click on a button to save these changes, and then when I click on that button, what needs to happen is we need to update that specific user object. Okay, so there's a lot of other things that we have to do, so we're going to take it step by step. The first thing that we want to do is obviously have our save button. So I think what I'll do is, I think up top, look, and then first off, well, we need to actually first know which user we want to update. And remember how earlier I told you that I will show you how we can grab that? Well, it's actually a lot easier than you might expect. So what I'll do right now is show you what happens whenever I click on this save button. So on click, let me register this on click event, and then we'll just go ahead and console log the user itself. And if I go into the document, you'll see that if I click on this save button, which pertains to this user over here, I log the first user, you can see the ID, username, and email are all over there. If I click on this save button, it logs the second user. Okay, so this should tell you right off the bat that each one of they have of the user through the array, and without actually modifying the original array, the user do that in React. We're kind of in a little bit of a situation. You'll notice that the user's state is actually in a completely different component. Now remember that the app component is a parent component of our user details component, making this a parent to child, child to parent relationship. Okay, but here's a nice thing though. Even though our state is defined at the parent level, we can easily still modify this user state either by passing in this dispatch function down to the user details component itself, or we can actually pass in a wrapper function to take care of managing the state for us. I'll show you both ways. The first way that I'll show you is just directly passing in the set users function. So what I'll do is this. So since we're going to pass in set users to the user details as a prop, and remember that you can actually pass functions as a prop to a component. So what I'm going to do is, since we are using prop validation, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I add this to the prop types. So set users will be a function is required.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. I don't know why shape was not required. I should have made this required. There we go. All right, so now let's go ahead and hit set users, and let's pass this into set users. Oh, I'm sorry, let's pass in set users to user details. Okay, so now we can easily call this function, and I'm going to show you the proper way that we're going to invoke this function as well as updating the state. So remember that whenever we click on the save button, this is where we actually want to make the changes to the state itself. Okay, so what we're going to do is inside the onClick event handler function, this is where we want to make sure we are capturing the username, the current state of the username, so whatever the user updated it to, and same thing for the email address. Okay, so we need the username and then we need the email address, but then we also need to make sure we have the ID of the user, which we can easily grab from user.id. Now, how do we actually modify the elements inside this user array? How do we do that? Now, there are a lot of ways that you can go about this, but I'm going to show you the right approach that the React team actually recommends you to do. So it also allows you to modify your state without actually directly mutating the array itself. And I'm also going to mention one more thing. I'm going to use an actual if-else statement instead of using a ternary operator because I don't want you all to get confused with the amount of parentheses that we're going to have. I will show you both, but I'm first going to show you how to do it with an if-else condition. So the first thing that we want to do is call our set users function that we passed in to our user details component. Remember that this function itself is our dispatch function, and remember that we can actually pass in a callback function. And the reason why we're going to pass in a callback function in this case is because I want access to the current state of users. Okay.
Oh, okay. So, somewhere in yesterday's what we yeah, we get the current state inside. Like it's saved within this somewhere. We don't need to pass it, right? So, that makes sense. So I guess what we would essentially do is that let's go to user details. Something like, so we have set users here, right? So it would be within the save button, right? Yeah, it's in the save button. All right. So on change, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the current state and then we're gonna we're gonna set users. Wait, what? How did I do that? Yeah, we're gonna pass an arrow function here, and then we're gonna call set users. This is quite like the amount of parentheses used here is just wild, and this is just a tutorial. How would a production React app look like? Yeah, set users. We take in the current state. But actually, that's within the. What am I doing? Okay, let's go, yeah. The amount of brackets is confusing me a bit, I guess. And then what we're gonna do is here we'll have the current state. declaration or statement expected. It needs to be another array. I mean, not an array, an object. This needs to be.
Okay, so I'm going to have my code current user state dot map. So I'm going to go ahead and call the map function on this.
Because it's it's not an array, is it? I mean, it's not an object, is it? It's an array, the current state. So okay, so I guess what he's doing is he's gonna call the map function, and this takes in another callback function with the value, which is our user. The others are optional, so I guess we're gonna check if user.id equals. Oh, actually, we have a user here, and we need to name this as user value. Let's name it that. User value dot id, is that equal to user dot id? If it is, then we're gonna return first we need to I guess we don't even need to take the values, because remember they're already within these variables, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna, and in this case we can't even just override it completely. So we're gonna do username is gonna be set to username, and value is gonna, sorry, email is gonna be set to email. Else, I mean, you just return the user. Okay, all right. Go back.
This current user state. Remember, this is an array of the current state of our user. What this
Hey,
box
dude,
and we
something
edited it in the
similar.
array itself. This has well an if condition. So if currently what this is checking for every single user, we only want to. It's gonna look like this. I'm going to take every single
Using
value
if
from current
statement.
user and create a copy of it
If
inside this new object. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to explicitly set the username and email address, because we know that those are two possible fields that could be updated. Now, if the user didn't edit any of these fields, like if they just didn't touch the field at all.
Yeah, I think let's make it a habit to pass in the current state. In this scenario, we can just pass these, but actually we can't, because we have the ID, right? You know what? I'll just make it a habit to always pass in the current state in such scenarios.
Then that would be fine, because by default, remember that the username of the user as well as the email of the user are set to these state variables by default. Okay, so if they didn't update the email address, for example, then the email would stay the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the username to the state variable username right at the top over here, and then same thing with the email as well. So I'm setting this email field to whatever the value of the email state variable is. Now, since these are the same names, I can actually just remove the colon, and I can just do it like this. Okay, and actually I don't need.
Oh yeah, there's another shorthand. Let's just keep it as it is. Let's not apply that shorthand here.
Because I'm using an explicit return keyword. So you'll notice that my formatter actually automatically removed those parentheses. Okay, I don't need the now, since these are the same names, I can actually just remove the colon, and I can just do it like this. Okay, and actually I don't need the parentheses because I'm using an explicit return keyword. So you'll notice that my formatter actually automatically removed those parentheses. Okay. But when we use the ternary operator, we will need that. But don't worry, I'll show you how to do that as well. Okay, so this handles the case if the current user is matching the user that we're editing. But if we're not editing the user, then all we want to simply do is just return the current user. And that. Now, there's one more thing that I want to do before we actually get to editing all, but we're not going to see it in view mode. So what I'm going to do is after I call set users, I'm going to go ahead and call set is editing. And this time I'm actually just going to pass it false. I don't need to do what I did on line 14 where I passed in this callback function and just set it to the opposite value of the current state, because every single time I click on this save button, I want to exit out of editing mode. And this is very common with any application. When you click save, that pretty much implies that you are exiting editing mode and you're done. Okay, so let's go into our document now and let's see what happens when I click edit. And I'll just change this to, let's do Anson the dev. And if I click save, you'll see now the username is now Anson the dev. If I click edit and let's change it to Anson the dev for the email, you'll see that the username and the email are both reflective. Obviously, we didn't change the username that time, so it's the same. And if I go down over here, if I change the username from Mike to Mike the dev, you'll notice that it only affects this user and not this user up top over here because we have this if check right over here. Of course, if I just didn't check for this and I just did this
So this should
exact
work
thing for everything,
for yeah, this should work now, right? So let's change Bob to Mike. We'll see when something's happening. Prop type. The prop set users, but its value is undefined. Are we passing set users? We aren't, so let's do that. User.name is marked as required in user details, but its value is undefined. Let's change this to username. Okay, what now? Set edit state to false.